What if I told you there are countries that would economically collapse, politically destabilize, or lose critical infrastructure overnight if China vanished from the map tomorrow? This isn't just about trade. It's about energy, rare earths, construction, even governance. China's influence is no longer just visible in global exports. It's embedded in national DNA. And as you'll see in this video, some nations aren't just connected to China, they're dependent. So buckle in. Wait till the end for one bonus country you'd never expect, one whose entire strategy hinges on Beijing. And if you want more rare geopolitical truths like this, hit that like button right now. It helps more than you think. Number 10. Laos. Laos isn't just a neighbor to China. It's an economic satellite in Beijing's Belt and Road Galaxy. Over 70% of Laos' external debt is owed to Chinese institutions, particularly linked to massive infrastructure projects like the $6 billion China-Laos Railway. It's not just a train, it's a lifeline that connects Laos to global trade it couldn't access alone. The catch? It comes at a price Laos can't afford to pay back anytime soon. The country has essentially mortgaged its energy and transit future to China. Entire hydropower plants that generate electricity for Thailand are owned and operated with Chinese technology and investment. These facilities, while boosting revenue, also bind Laos to long-term operating agreements with Chinese state firms. It's not just debt, it's entanglement. Even Laos' telecom and surveillance infrastructure is embedded with Chinese technology. From 5G trials to smart city plans in Vientiane, Beijing's tech companies dominate the landscape, giving China indirect access to data pipelines. For a small landlocked country, this kind of digital reliance is both a shortcut and a shackle. Culturally, Chinese tourists account for nearly half of all visitors to Laos in peak years. Restaurants print menus in Mandarin. Hotel chains adjust operations based on Chinese holiday seasons. The tourism economy here dances to China's rhythm, and when Chinese tourists stopped coming during COVID, entire districts went quiet. Laos' economy also depends on cross-border trade for essentials like electronics, machinery, and even processed food. Remove China from the equation, and supply chains in Laos grind to a halt. That's not a dependency, it's an umbilical cord. Geopolitically, Laos consistently aligns itself with Beijing on international forums. It rarely speaks out against Chinese positions on South China Sea disputes or human rights. That's not a coincidence. It's strategic self-preservation. And here's the unsettling truth. Laos' government understands this. But with few alternatives, it's a choice between being an appendage of China or being irrelevant in the global economy. If this kind of analysis hooks you, drop a comment below. We'd love to hear your thoughts. Number 9. Zimbabwe. At first glance, Zimbabwe and China look like unlikely partners, one battered by hyperinflation and sanctions, the other a global superpower. But dig deeper, and you'll see that Zimbabwe has become increasingly intertwined with Chinese capital and labor. Nearly all major infrastructure projects, from roads to energy plants, are funded or constructed by Chinese firms. Zimbabwe's economic lifeline rests on mining, particularly gold, chrome, and platinum. Chinese companies have swept in with capital and contracts, and now dominate large portions of the sector. In return, Zimbabwe gets revenue, but also environmental degradation, labor exploitation concerns, and heavy debt loads tied to opaque loan deals. This isn't just about resources. Chinese military and police training exchanges have increased over the last decade. Surveillance tech provided by Huawei and ZTE is helping Zimbabwe's regime monitor dissent. That kind of influence extends beyond economics. It becomes a lever of political control. Even at the retail level, Chinese businesses are displacing local markets. Wholesale outlets, construction material depots, and even grocery chains are now run by Chinese nationals. Prices go down, but so does local empowerment. What's left is a system that survives only because of Beijing's presence. When international institutions cut Zimbabwe off due to governance failures, China stepped in, not just with loans, but with diplomatic cover. Beijing's refusal to engage in domestic political criticism gave Zimbabwe a cushion the West wouldn't offer. In return, Zimbabwe often backs Chinese positions at the UN and in African forums. There's an irony here. Zimbabwe resents Western control, yet has walked into another form of dependency. But it's one with fewer questions asked. That silence is golden for leaders facing domestic unrest. And while China's footprint isn't always celebrated by citizens, there's a quiet acceptance. Without China, bridges don't get built, power plants stall, and salaries dry up. That's not just help, it's hegemony. Subscribe now if you're enjoying this unfiltered breakdown of economic power plays. Number 8. Cambodia. Cambodia's skyline is proof of China's influence. Tower cranes, glassy skyscrapers, and mega casinos all trace back to Chinese real estate investments. In Phnom Penh and Sihanoukville, entire neighborhoods have transformed into Chinese enclaves. Local real estate is priced in US dollars, but funded by yuan. The Belt and Road Initiative has pumped billions into Cambodian roads, ports, and hydropower. These aren't grants. They're loans Cambodia will be paying off for decades, often in exchange for land leases and strategic access. What China gets is long-term leverage, both in geography and governance. Politically, Cambodia aligns with China on nearly every regional dispute. It routinely blocks ASEAN from issuing statements critical of Beijing. In exchange, China shields Cambodia from Western sanctions over its deteriorating democratic practices. The game is clear: silence for support. Chinese migration to Cambodia has also changed local dynamics. Gambling hubs built for Chinese tourists often exclude Cambodians entirely. These zones operate on Chinese apps, employ Mandarin speakers, and settle disputes via private security. It's a parallel economy inside another sovereign state. Cambodia's military has also received quiet upgrades through Chinese support. Joint training exercises, equipment donations, and suspected naval agreements suggest deeper strategic ties than are publicly acknowledged. If push came to shove, Phnom Penh knows exactly where its protection lies. Even education has been influenced. Chinese language schools are expanding, Confucius institutes are spreading, and Mandarin is now considered a business language across urban centers. Culture follows capital, and in Cambodia, that trend is accelerating. And here's a quick ask. If you've learned something new so far, tap that like button. It tells us to keep making content that cuts through the noise. Number 7. Pakistan. Pakistan and China often refer to each other as iron brothers. But iron is also brittle under pressure. The China-Pakistan Economic Corridor, worth over $60 billion, is a flagship belt and road project that stitches Pakistan's infrastructure directly into China's strategy. From highways cutting across Balochistan to new power plants lighting up Karachi, Pakistan's development trajectory has been reshaped by Chinese finance. But this also means debt obligations, security risks, and sovereignty trade-offs. The Gwadar port, for example, is technically Pakistani, but functionally Chinese. Energy shortages once crippled Pakistan. Now, Chinese coal and hydro projects keep the lights on. But many of these operate under take-or-pay clauses, forcing Pakistan to pay even for unused power. That's a lifeline with strings tightly wrapped. Security cooperation is intense. China supplies fighter jets, naval ships, and surveillance drones. In return, Pakistan maintains silence on Xinjiang and provides security for thousands of Chinese workers within its borders. It's a quid pro quo grounded in mutual necessity. Trade is lopsided. Pakistan imports heavily from China: electronics, machinery, textiles, but exports very little back. This imbalance creates pressure on Pakistan's currency and foreign reserves, keeping it in a perpetual loop of aid and debt rollover. Domestically, Chinese companies enjoy special tax incentives and regulatory bypasses that local firms don't. While that boosts foreign investment, it also creates resentment among Pakistani entrepreneurs who feel outcompete in their own market. What's striking is how China has replaced traditional Western allies in nearly every sector: military, economy, diplomacy. Pakistan didn't just pivot, it flipped. If you've noticed that too, comment below and tell us your thoughts on this complex alliance. Number 6. Iran. Iran's relationship with China is forged in isolation. As Western sanctions tighten, China has emerged as Tehran's most reliable economic partner, buying oil, exporting machinery, and supporting infrastructure despite international pressure. The $400 billion, 25-year agreement signed in 2021 gives China discounted access to Iran's energy sector in exchange for investments in telecom, transport, and banking. It's not charity, it's opportunistic alignment. But for Iran, it's one of the few viable lifelines. Chinese firms now dominate Iranian oil field services, telecom networks, and even some banking infrastructure. Huawei equipment is widely deployed, and Chinese banks provide channels to circumvent dollar-denominated trade. China also helps Iran diplomatically. At the UN Security Council, China routinely softens language on Iran-related resolutions. This diplomatic shield allows Iran to maneuver more boldly in regional conflicts without total isolation. And let's not ignore arms sales. Though limited due to treaties, military cooperation continues through drone tech, training, and cybersecurity. Iran's capacity to resist regional containment strategies owes much to Chinese tech know-how. The relationship is not without friction. China is wary of overexposure to U.S. sanctions. But the logic is simple. A weakened, cornered Iran is a pliable partner. For Tehran, China is not just a partner, it's a pressure valve. Iran's leadership openly calls the alliance strategic and civilizational. That may be diplomatic language, but in practice, it reflects something more desperate: reliance. If you want more geopolitical truth bombs like this, make sure to subscribe. There's more ahead. Wait till the end. The bonus country will shock you. It's not even in Asia. Number 5. Sri Lanka. Sri Lanka's debt crisis wasn't caused by China, but Beijing's lending practices didn't help either. The infamous Hambantota port deal, where Sri Lanka leased a Chinese-built port to a Chinese firm for 99 years, became a symbol of what critics call debt trap diplomacy. For Sri Lanka, it was less about geopolitics and more about desperation. But the dependency runs deeper than one port. China funded highways, airports, conference centers, even entire city districts. These projects, though flashy, failed to generate the expected revenue, leaving the country financially exposed. And yet, when Sri Lanka sought urgent bailout support, it had to look back toward China again. The island nation's imports, from electronics to textiles, are predominantly Chinese. Remove that pipeline, and prices surge, supply dries up, and daily life becomes unpredictable. Dependency isn't always dramatic. It often creeps in through routine. Politically, Sri Lanka often avoids criticizing China, even when tensions with India or the West escalate. It's a balancing act, but the fulcrum leans heavily toward Beijing. The government knows this isn't just about diplomacy, it's survival math. Chinese tourists made up a significant portion of Sri Lanka's tourism industry pre-COVID. Their absence triggered cascading effects in hospitality and retail, proving how even short-term pauses in Chinese engagement can disrupt national cash flow. The Rajapaksa regime and successors have courted Chinese investment aggressively, often bypassing traditional tender systems. This has opened the door to criticism about transparency, but with few lenders willing to write checks, Sri Lanka takes what it can get. And if you're still watching this deep dive into China's global entanglements, consider dropping a like. It's a small click for you, but it helps us keep building videos like this with real, untold insights. Number 4. Mongolia. Sandwiched between Russia and China, Mongolia's geography forces it into limited options. Over 90% of Mongolia's exports go to China, primarily in the form of copper, coal, and minerals. That's not trade diversity, it's vulnerability. Mongolia's economy rises and falls with Chinese demand. When China reduces steel production or tightens customs, Mongolian GDP takes a direct hit. This is more than correlation, it's a leash. Infrastructure projects are increasingly designed with Chinese transit in mind. Rail links, mining roads, and border logistics all cater to China's economic machinery. Mongolia doesn't just ship to China, it builds for China. Even diplomatically, Mongolia often navigates cautiously, avoiding any moves that would upset Beijing, such as overt support for Tibetan independence or stronger ties with Taiwan. Political neutrality becomes a form of economic self-preservation. Cultural penetration is subtle but present. Chinese investment has poured into language institutes, tourism, and local media. While Mongolians are proud of their heritage, the economic reality shapes much of what is broadcast and taught. Even Mongolia's attempts to court the West often end in redirection. Chinese pressure quietly influences which projects move forward and which stall. A copper deal in Ulaanbaatar might look sovereign on paper, but follow the money, and Beijing's fingerprints show up. What's most revealing is that Mongolia's leaders publicly state their reliance on China while quietly seeking diversification. That duality defines modern economic diplomacy. If this contradiction resonates with you, leave a comment. What do you think Mongolia's best path forward could be? Number 3. Ecuador. In South America, Ecuador may not scream China-aligned, but scratch beneath the surface, and you'll see a nation whose financial arteries pulse with Beijing's credit. Massive Chinese loans were exchanged for oil guarantees, locking Ecuador into long-term energy exports at discounted rates. The oil for loans deal meant Ecuador was pre-selling its sovereignty. Every barrel exported under the agreement was a reminder of Chinese leverage. These weren't short-term loans. They were 20-year commitments that shaped Ecuador's budgets for decades. Chinese firms didn't just take oil, they built the infrastructure to extract and ship it. From hydroelectric dams like Coca-Cola Sinclair to mining operations deep in the Andes, China's engineering imprint is everywhere. These are assets, but also liabilities when maintenance and environmental impact fall short. Ecuadorian officials have publicly stated concerns over cost overruns, faulty construction, and opaque financing in these Chinese-backed projects. But again, options are limited. The Western institutions that once dominated lending have pulled back, leaving China as the only game in town. Telecom and surveillance tech, Chinese. Drones for police, Chinese. Construction of highways and public housing, also Chinese. Ecuador is becoming a case study in how infrastructure diplomacy works across oceans. Even public perception is divided. Some celebrate new roads and lights. Others worry about sovereignty slipping away brick by brick. The debate isn't about whether China's role is large. It's about whether it's too large. And if you've made it this far, now's a good time to hit that subscribe button. We go deep on stories the mainstream barely mentions, because understanding global power means following the contracts, not just the headlines. Number 2. Serbia. Serbia is China's foothold into Europe's soft underbelly. The country has openly embraced Beijing's political and financial support, especially as its EU membership prospects remain stalled. In that vacuum, China stepped in, not with promises, but with cranes, capital, and contracts. Belgrade's skyline is now dotted with Chinese-built bridges, roads, and factories. Huawei rolled out Serbia's 5G network, and surveillance systems in major cities were also Chinese-supplied. This isn't just influence, it's operational control of key infrastructure. China has also used Serbia as a launchpad for vaccine diplomacy. During the pandemic, Beijing supplied Sinopharm doses when EU partners hesitated. That soft power move paid off. China is now Serbia's second-largest trading partner. Serbia often backs China at the UN, particularly on issues like Xinjiang, Taiwan, and Hong Kong. In return, Beijing amplifies Serbia's position on Kosovo, giving it diplomatic weight it couldn't achieve alone. The exchange is pragmatic, not sentimental. Culturally, Chinese language institutes are rising, and business-to-business forums between the two nations are increasingly normalized. Chinese companies now own stakes in steel plants, mines, and automotive supply chains in Serbia's industrial heartland. Serbia has positioned itself as a European outlier, neither fully west nor east. That ambiguity gives China a gateway into European logistics and influence. The Danube, long a river of European trade, now carries echoes of Chinese strategy. And if this kind of geopolitical storytelling keeps you watching, drop a comment and let us know what other alliances you think deserve scrutiny. Bonus country, Australia. Yes, you read that right, Australia. Despite diplomatic tensions, trade wars, and calls for decoupling, Australia remains tightly hitched to China's economy. Nearly one-third of its total exports go to China. Iron ore alone, used in China's massive construction industry, accounts for a huge chunk of Australian GDP. When China slowed construction during lockdowns, Australia's mining sector felt tremors. When it restricted wine, barley, and coal imports during diplomatic disputes, those industries reeled. That's not just interdependence, it's a strategic risk. Australian universities also rely heavily on Chinese students for revenue. When COVID restrictions hit and political tensions rose, entire university budgets wobbled. Billions in tuition fees, housing, and student-related services vanished, revealing a hidden soft power chokehold. Even tourism saw major losses. Chinese tourists were among the biggest spenders pre-pandemic. Their absence not only affected airlines and hotels, but also rippled industries like luxury retail and food service. China doesn't need sanctions to exert control. It just needs to pause flights. Huawei may have been banned from 5G, but Chinese capital still flows into Australian real estate, agriculture, and tech startups. While regulators push back, the economic ties are already in place, deep and difficult to untangle. Ironically, even as Australia calls for diversification, China remains the primary buyer of its most valuable commodities. Canberra's sovereignty lies not just in politics, but in port shipments. That paradox defines modern geopolitics. And that's your bonus country, a Western democracy that talks tough, but depends quietly. Number 1. North Korea. North Korea is often portrayed as self-reliant. In reality, it's economically oxygenated by one country alone, China. Over 90% of its trade flows through China. When Beijing closes the border, Pyongyang gasps. Food aid, energy shipments, and illicit trade all run through Chinese intermediaries. Even North Korean workers abroad, used to bring in hard currency, operate in Chinese zones or under Chinese oversight. Without Beijing, the regime would face economic suffocation. During diplomatic standoffs, China has shielded North Korea from full-scale sanctions at the UN. It plays a dual role, publicly condemning nuclear tests, but privately maintaining a lifeline. That balance allows Kim Jong-un to keep posturing without collapsing. Chinese goods dominate North Korean markets, from electronics to clothing. Even in a closed economy, Chinese brands are omnipresent. The black market thrives on Chinese supplies, often with quiet nods from border officials. Beijing fears instability more than ideology. A collapsed North Korea means refugees flooding into China's northeast. That's why, regardless of missile launches, China maintains the minimum support needed to avoid regime failure. Military cooperation is limited but consistent. Historical ties from the Korean War still linger, and training exchanges continue under the radar. While China doesn't control Pyongyang, it certainly keeps it on a leash. In short, North Korea's isolation is a mirage. Behind that curtain stands China, always present, always calculating. So there you have it, 10 countries, each tied to China not by coincidence, but by necessity. Some entered willingly, others had no choice, but all now live in Beijing's gravitational pull. If you found this video eye-opening, subscribe for more content like this. Which country surprised you the most? Drop it in the comments. Because in the 21st century, global power isn't just about borders. It's about who pays your bills.